Well, welcome to Mobile First for responsive design. Have you guys had fun so far today at learn some stuff here?
Sure.
Some pretty good sessions. It's pretty good. It's 3 years now I've been doing this, and every year I feel like it just gets better and better in terms of the content. I was pretty humbled to be even selected to be picked along some of these people that have given talks today. It's really great stuff. Um, my name is Benjamin Bykowski. Call me Ben if you want. My Twitter up there at Sirius B. Yep. That's the Twitter handle, so if you want to tweet to that for a chance at the book here. You can check out my blog, wordofmouth.com, that I sometimes post on. I'm trying to get better at that. Seriously, I am. And so without further ado, let's get into this. The first thing I want to talk about is why. Because I'm sure that I don't have to convince a lot of you that mobile first is a good idea. I mean, if you're here right now, you're probably thinking, hey, maybe it is. I mean, they've written books about it, so I'm sure it probably makes sense. But at the same time, I'm sure that there's people that you have to go back to, whether that's your boss or it's clients that you have to talk to, stakeholders, whatever. And they're all going to want to know why, because they're not going to be very comfortable with this because, throughout the years, mostly stuff has been focused on the idea of the desktop first, because that's like the big user experience, and we'll just gracefully degrade down to the mobile experience if they even consider it at all. So what I'm going to do is kind of make a point about this so that you can think about that and then take it back to them as kind of a reason. So the big reason why is, well, statistics. Now, there are thousands of these infographics that will tell you that mobile is the future, and it is coming, and it is coming for you, and it's going to be in a town near you soon, and et cetera. And this is, I think probably one of the more compelling things. You can get these anywhere, but this is all based on facts. So this trend isn't going away anytime soon. I picked out a few that I thought, were prescient, and that were, like this one comes from Luke's book, and I read that and I thought, well, geez, I mean that's just mind blowing that's happening, and that's right now, right?
So everybody's going to have two.
Exactly. Just like in the first slide where the baby's got the phone, they'll be surfing pretty soon. The thing that's compelling about this to me is the fact that this is just for tablets. This doesn't count mobile phones or feature phones or smartphones. I went to StatCounter and actually measured this yesterday. Okay, so we're talking June 2014 going back to just 2013. There's been a 15% decline in desktop use. 15% in 1 year. And at the same time, mobile and web is doubled in that same period, doubled nearly. It's about 29%. And this one I thought was also compelling because if you think about it, so what if people are like, spending 45 minutes on their computer, if they start the first 5 minutes of their search on their phone or some other device, and then they move to the computer, that's still important because now you have to think about the consistency of your content. So, this comes directly from Google. And this one, I was actually at Rust Belt Refresh yesterday, and Matt Griffin gave a talk, and he used the same statistic. This is really significant for really large companies like Amazon, but it's not insignificant for the rest of us because, 100 milliseconds is something that, we should be aiming for. You can shave that off. That's kind of a big deal. If you can get that up to a second, that's actually noticeable. 100 milliseconds is instantaneous, but for Amazon, he calculated to be like $157 million that they lose per quarter if they're not bringing that down, or missing out on, I should say. So the thing that I want to talk about is the that goes past all that stuff, and I want to give kind of a little bit of a history lesson here. So back in the day, dial-up, we all remember having to click on our modems and wait for it to connect, and it was really slow, and you could maybe play Doom 2 with 2 players over the internet, and that was it. And so the internet, you were forced to have to be optimized with everything you did because you had very little bandwidth to work with. And when broadband came out, and it made Web 2.0 possible, and everybody was all excited, woohoo, we can use Flash and giant videos and images and all this other stuff. But it came at a price, right? I mean, we took it for granted. We started thinking, well, if I've got a fast internet connection, it's spreading fast, who cares about everybody else? And so the web just started to get kind of like just bloated. Web page size has increased. It's like an epidemic. on average, it's up over a meg, and it really shouldn't be. I mean, we can do a lot better than that. And the thing about it is, the mobile web reintroduces this problem to us. Now, my device might have a way faster processor than my 486 DX33 that I was running back in the 90s, but its screen size is smaller. And if I'm connected on a 3G network, who's to say that that connection? I mean, I'm going to be able to get the content that I need, especially when I'm paying for that content, because now it really matters to me. It's not just that it's slow, but it's costing me money. So I want to tell you a story about a guy from a developer at YouTube. By the way, this animation, this is NASA's global selfie playing here in the background. So I think we're going to zoom in on Pittsburgh here and see who the selfies are that they kind of picked there. Yeah, so this is all done with selfies. They composited the image together. It's really cool. But I'm having this play while I want to talk about something else, is that back in 2012, Chris Zacharias was a developer at YouTube, and he had one of his colleagues was complaining that their page size had ballooned to like 1.5 meg or something. And he said, this is ridiculous when I can write an entire Quake kernel in less than 100K. We should be able to do better than this. And so he said, you know what, you're right. And so they started a project called Feather. And the idea was they wanted to get the page weight down to below 100K. They just shot for that. They had to take a lot of stuff out. They stripped the page down to just a few preview videos. Comments would load only on click. Eventually, he was able to hit it by putting an HTML5 video player on the page. And so they were real excited because it took them a lot of doing, but they were able to get there. And so they put it out, and they put it into this sort of beta opt-in, just 1% of the traffic or whatever it was that people could get. And people got excited about it, and so they let it run for a while, and then they went back and looked at the analytics. And here's what the analytics showed. Their page load, their latency increased. Anybody want to guess why?
QPS went up.
So, no, but it's a good guess. So here's what was happening. People around the world that had never accessed YouTube before suddenly could. There were people that were connecting that were in Southeast Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, places like remote places in Siberia. I mean, they were getting the analytics so they could tell this. And although the page still took something like 2 minutes to load over their crazy connections, they were actually able to watch videos on YouTube for the very first time. And that was pretty significant because it showed that they were able to reach out to much more diverse markets, with crazy constraints, using the same technology. So so that was like a big eye-opener for them, and I think it should be a big eye-opener for all of us to think about that. If we can optimize what we're doing, that we can reach other places, that we just really couldn't, before, if we're going to continue with the whole Web 2.0 web bloat thing. So to me, I felt like there was a big history lesson in this, and it's the universal history lesson. So if we're going to do these things and we're not going to learn from them, I mean, it's just going to come back to bite us, like it already has. And at some point, I'm going to try to remember. I'm going to show you something that I saw yesterday that Jeremy Keith showed me that I thought was pretty cool. So you might be saying, okay, I convinced you. You probably already convinced. You have enough ammunition. You can go back and talk about this and get your boss to buy in or your clients to buy in. But how do you do that? I mean, how do you get them to stop thinking about, I want to see, a mounted, PSD on a board and think of that as my interactive experience? Well, the first thing I want to do is talk about just the mistakes, the pitfalls that what we all run into when we first start doing this. And I'll save you the pain on some of that. So some of this stuff maybe you guys already know about. So you might have heard this, okay, can you build me a separate mobile website? I get this question all the time from clients. They want, hey, can you build me a .mobi site? .mobi, yeah, sure. Why? And they're like, well, we know that mobile is really important and we want a separate website. Thing is, that's one more ball to juggle. That's one more thing to take care of. You've got to think about your content there now and on your main website. And what if it gets out of sync? And how are you keeping it consistent? And the thing of it is, I mean, have you even asked them? Is that what they want? I doubt that most users are going to actually want to know, hey, I want a different experience. Because at the end of the day, if they can do it on their desktop, they're going to want to be able to do it on their mobile device, on their tablet. So don't give them a different experience. I mean, there's edge cases. Maybe, airlines, you don't need all that stuff to book a flight. You just want to check the flight status. I could get that. But in the majority of the cases, you're going to want this to be responsive. And it's going to save you in the end. It's going to save you time and money, managing your content, keeping it consistent. The next thing, common pitfall that I find is people, they want to design like, okay, we're going to do, for a mobile device, we're going to do the iPhone, and then we're going to do the iPad, and then we're going to do the desktop. And I was like, okay, that's good. The iPad mini just came out. Oh yeah, we'll do that one too. I'm like, well, what about portrait and landscape? Oh, good thinking. And I mean, it just goes on and on. It never ends. So you're not going to be able to develop, designs, wireframes, everything, for let's put all the breakpoints in with media queries. It's just not going to work. What you need to do is focus on the content. The content is going to dictate where those breakpoints need to be. Resize. When the content breaks, that's where your breakpoint goes. Forget about screen size. So that was one thing. I will say that it does make sense to do something at kind of edge case, boundary testing kind of stuff. Do it on mobile and do it at full with desktop. Yes.
You use the term breakpoint. What does that mean?
So like in a media query, you can set a certain pixel size. A media query. So in CSS, I can say, here I'm going to apply this rule, and with the selector that uses a media query to say, hey, I want to look at the screen size of, say, 960 pixels. You can say that, well, I want these rules to be applied only below 960 pixels. So it stops the browser from rendering content at full width, or maybe it switches from 4 columns to 3 columns, or 2 columns to 1. That all happens through the application of media queries. And what I've seen at least, happen is that people will go, oh, well, we'll pick the sizes of these devices and use those as our breakpoint, sort of like pre-set up, so we don't have to worry about it. But the problem is that just completely leaves content out of it. You don't think about your content, and so if you've got an image with like, one word line of text going down the size of it, it's unreadable, it's unusable. So that's what I'm advocating, is that you should look at the content to define your breakpoints, not the device. The other thing is that people will say, well, can't you just make my existing website responsive? I mean, at the end of the day, it's, all it is just some changing to the CSS and HTML, right? Not a big deal. Well, yeah, actually it is. And I can say this with some conviction because, websites that we've worked on, we try to do some of that, and it really is, just diminishing returns. It takes you 2, 3, 5 times as long to make a site responsive that wasn't designed to be responsive in the first place, because, like I said before, content is a big factor. And not to mention that, whatever the designer that was, or front-end developer that was building it is, he's going to have his conventions for stuff that he was doing. He's probably thinking fixed width, and so a lot of that's going to be baked into that, so you have to rip all that out. I mean, you might as well just start from scratch. In fact, you'll probably do better. It's refactoring is what it is, and we should all be refactoring. We all know that. So basically, there's one point to get from all of these pitfalls, if there's any. Just don't do them. Don't do any of that stuff. Skip over it and you'll be much happier. Instead, I want to focus on good practices. I don't call them best practices, because best practice tends to have this sort of connotation that somehow we have figured it out and this is the end-all be-all. Like, it's not that. I mean, this is the web, this is technology, software. This stuff is always changing. We're always having to adapt what we're doing. So I'd really kind of like, if it's good, good. Just don't be evil and just be good. So the first thing that I want to look at is the idea of content first. So what you want to do with content first is, well, I should say, the concept of content first is really what's behind mobile first. Or some people will say API first, because the API is going to just dictate the content that you're going to spin on. Well, it's really just content. What this does is it forces you to focus on what's important. You don't have the luxury of this giant canvas to just throw up a bunch of stuff on. Now you have to think like, well, what content do I want them to see first? What is important? And what's not so important? So it makes you kind of think in that terms. What I found is that with larger size screens, larger size pages where there's a lot of content, you really want to be thinking in terms of a narrative. You're trying to tell a story. You're trying to kind of cohesively bring some things together. And if you can do that, then telling that story will lend itself naturally to a vertical scrolling layout. And when you do that, you come up with elements, and the structure emerges. You get style guides that you can then develop from this, or style tiles. There's things like that that you can come up with. That they're like components. It's like Legos. You can kind of click them together, and you can mix and match as you need. And then I spent a lot of time thinking about the order of importance. So people used to say like required, nice to have, and it was like then the other thing, whatever that is. Really, what I want to advocate is that there's three things. Things are either essential, useful, or peripheral, okay? And they must be one of these three things. Essential things are obvious. They have to be there because it's core to what you're trying to communicate or display or do. So that might be your value proposition. It might be your product, or it might be who you are, whatever. But then beyond that, you want to have stuff that's useful. Now, the useful stuff is there as, this is things like navigation, it's search, it's anything that, people are going to need to I need to log into the portal. Okay, well, that's there. You argue, well, that's essential. Well, it's maybe not essential to the person first coming to the site if what you want to do is convey a good first impression. But it is definitely useful. So if it's not one of those two things, then it's peripheral. Now, peripheral really is kind of this thing that it's there to support what's already there, or it's to add to. And anything that's peripheral is two things. It's there, and it's kind of like it's on the block. We could take it off, or we could keep it, but it better serve some purpose. It better support something that's already there. If it doesn't support something that's already there, you should get rid of it. And if it's there and it's just kind of like, well, it's okay. If you didn't have it, everything would work fine. Then that's when I can advocate, like, hey, you might have like a blog layout with your sidebar that you don't really need in mobile because you're really just focusing on your post list and stuff like that because everything else goes into the nav. So really be thinking about that. The second thing is another thing I've spent a lot of time curating this idea, and post the conference, I'm going to get this up into GitHub so everybody can have access to these as templates. But coded sitemaps, okay. So the idea here is that most sitemaps, if you create sitemaps, are there to sort of organize content, and that's fine. It's a bunch of boxes, and it's like, oh, here's a section, here's a bunch of stuff. But my experience is that they don't really tell you a whole lot other than like, hey, here's how. It's like kind of like an inverted bulleted list, like, hey, and this indents down a couple more. What I really think is important is that if you look at a sitemap and you're a developer and you see one of the boxes says contact, is it the contact page? Is there a form on that page? Is there just contact information? Is there a map on that page? It doesn't tell you anything. It just says contact. Well, by using these things here, so the things on the left is more like a state, and the stuff that, the left, and on the right is a type, okay? So you can combine these things endlessly. Static content doesn't really have anything more than what it says. It's just HTML on the page. Forms, listing content. So if you've got a list of articles, events, search results, that's going to be coming from a data source and be listed. A landing or section page might aggregate a number of things, pull them up and show them, it might be kind of like a mini homepage. That might indicate that you might need a design for that, or a wireframe at least. And then structured content in terms of like things that might have data that describes it, metadata, or data that needs to be thought of, displayed, and arrayed on the page. So a product that could have color and fabric and price and size and all these things. An event could have a start date and an end date and a location. That would be structured content. And then just non-navigable would be anything that you want to be able to have on the site, but you don't want to show up in the navigation. So if you're representing it in the sitemap, you're like not saying, oh, this needs to go in the nav, but it might be like like a landing page for some promotion that you might be doing, or like a policy page or something, or a thank you page after you fill out a form. So using those, then you can combine them with the rest of the stuff to really kind of tell people more about what they're seeing when they're looking at the sitemap. It communicates features and functionality, and that's important because then you can start to think about, well, how many layouts do I need to do? How many pieces of structure do I need to create within my design before I go to start building this stuff, or as I'm starting to build this stuff, so I can start to plan. I could put it into the backlog and say, we're going to do the product page first, and then we're going to do the request a quote page next, and everything else, and it makes us think like that, so it keeps us more efficient. So user interface, information architecture, user experience, I don't know what it is, UIX, I've got this thing that I've kind of come up with. So for me, I'm going to talk about these tools. I'm not saying that you have to use these tools. I'm just advocating that they're pretty good. I've used them for a long time and had a lot of good luck with them. When it comes to sitemaps, the tools that I find to be pretty good for that are OmniGraffle and Visio. I don't really use Visio anymore, but because I'm on the Mac a lot. I find that It's very clean. It's easy to use. It's a great program for layout and doing, and I'd really use it in conjunction with what I just showed with that content, coded content. And I think that you could be a lot more effective that way. Again, you could use anything else, Glyphy or Mockingbird or any of these other tools for doing layout. Wireframe's the same way. I use Balsamiq for wireframes because it's cheap and it's sketchy and it's limited, and so it stops you from trying to jump into the designer shoes and start picking fonts and colors and hey, because everything is basically Comic Sans. It's not really, but it's their own little font, but it looks like Comic Sans. It's all sketchy, and this is really important because there have been so many times where I have presented wireframes to a client and they've given me feedback like, well, we think there's too much blue and too much gray, and we don't like the font that you we're talking about layout and priority here, okay? And so it helps avoid that. So I found that to be pretty good. OmniGraph is also very good. It's more powerful. It's got a lot more features, but it's also, I would argue, it could get you in trouble. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with it. I actually use the two of them together. I'll actually do the wireframes in Balsamiq, and then I pull them into OmniGraffle and lay them out with Keniji's kind of nice little template that he has. If anybody's seen Keniji's wireframes, are a free template you can download for OmniGraffle. They're great. He actually has them for lots of different programs, not just OmniGraffle. And then finally, prototypes. So if you've ever seen Axure, this is a great, they kind of tout it as being the silver bullet. It can do everything. Really what I think it's good at is for doing prototypes. Because you can create a wireframe that's got some stuff, and you can drop in a YouTube video, and you can have, wait, when I click on this, it expands this box, and modal pop-ups, and all that kind of stuff. So you can really show what the interaction is going to be like. I think that's good. Macaw is something new that's come out that I've been playing with a little bit. What's nice about this is it kicks out pretty good, clean CSS and HTML, so you can put this right up onto a server. You can put it as part of a build and just go, hey, I kick this out, and you've got a prototype up. The important thing is that you should be able to do this stuff fast, because you want to quickly get to a concept for somebody and be able to say, hey, we want to do this thing, and here's what we think how it would work. So here's an example of a sitemap that I developed recently, and one of the things about this is that we've got representation of all different kinds of content. First being static content, okay? So we've got static content. You can tell just by looking. It's got a gray background. I always have the legend on these pages so that people can see. We've got section pages. The one all the way to the left here has got a dotted line and a double line. So it's both. It's going to be built in the future. It's also going to be a login page. You have to log in to go there. So it's a secure page. So those that stuff's being conveyed. Here I've got some forms. You know what those are. There's no ambiguity that contact, it really is a form. Or there at least is going to be a form on that page. And then we've got structured content over here. So structured content, as I said, here we're doing news stories, quarterly reports, events, things like that. But again, it tells the developer, hey, you're going to want a template that's going to have some fields to be able to manipulate this content. So beyond that, looking at wireframes, so this is my approach. I do the wireframes mobile first, okay? This doesn't mean that I actually go to the client and say, here's your wireframes. I will still start with the desktop. But I do these first, and I do it because it keeps me from making a bad decision that I can't get my way out of. It's hard to design your way out of something when you have taken too many liberties at a much higher level. So you want to include contextual annotation to talk about what it is that this thing is doing. Provide that there because it's not only there for you, it'll remind you if you work on a project long enough, but it'll also be there for developers to look at and understand, hey, when I click on this, it's going to be an interactive map. It's not just a graphic. Things about like breaking this up. So if you do a mobile wireframe, it's going to be really long. So you're going to want to like take this and break it up into across a page so that you can actually talk about it and show it. Otherwise, it's like micro size when you're presenting. And then you want to adjust for the vertical orientation of things. I'm going to show you this same wireframe in a desktop layout here in a second. But I wanted to think about, okay, how does this stuff stack up? It looks pretty good. It's laid out. It's easy to use. But then when I go to the desktop level, I've got a lot more that I can do. I can spread things out, use white space, make it look all pretty and cool and everything like that. And that's what the clients love. They get all excited about that. But at the same time, when we go back to the mobile, it's not like that's broken or that wasn't thought of. I thought of that first, and so there's still a really good experience with the same content. I also on the same project ran into an issue with this timeline that they wanted to display. They wanted a bunch of milestones for their company as it was being built out over time. and they wanted to couple that with a bunch of milestones in the internet. And this is a 2-column thing, and it was like, that's great, but we only have this skinny little screen. We can't do much. So what I did was I said, well, what if we color-coded these, on down the page? I actually went on Behance and a bunch of places and saw some people doing things like this. So that's where I got the idea. I didn't just think of it. But it was, to me, it was important that I solved for this issue here before I moved on. The color coding kind of comes out and you can see it. Now the content itself still tells you like, oh, I don't think that they're going to mix up that, that Zappos, .com was acquired by Amazon for $928 million. That was clearly an internet thing versus something that happened to their company. So, I don't think we're leaving anybody with color blindedness out, but just a little bit of an enhancement there. But then again, at the desktop level, you can see how stuff separates out, and it's nice, and when it's got room to breathe, it can. So the content works in both ways. You're not handicapping yourself to saying, well, let's just not show the timeline in the mobile version. Well, that would be kind of a failure in my mind. So this gets you all through the concept stuff. So we do all this concepting, but then what? You're gonna get designs, you're gonna get other things. So what happens when you get to the build? I love this because I want to go to this or take my kids to this park because it's the lava's the ground and they have to make their way through. I'm like, oh God, if I had that when I was a kid, are you kidding me? So challenge accepted. So here's the thing. There's a lot of tools, and I think that if you go out there and you're building stuff, you feel free to use the stuff that you're comfortable with. If you like Notepad++, go to town. If you like regular Notepad, awesome. I really like Sublime Text 3. It's great for a lot of reasons. It's a mature product, but at the same time, it's real lightweight. You could do everything with it. I develop in Java with it. I develop JavaScript and HTML. I've done stuff in Node. I mean, you can really just do about anything with it. It's great. It's free to install. You have to pay for it if you're going to keep using it, but it just keeps yelling at you. It doesn't actually force you to do anything. So whatever your favorite text editor, definitely you're going to need that. Sass and Compass are just awesome. I can't imagine writing CSS by hand and nowadays. This just does so much, especially when you talk about doing media queries or if you're trying to do separate styles for edge case stuff in older browsers. Mix-ins, being able to put settings into your stuff so it just spits out really great stuff. If you're not going to use Sass, Less is good too. I'm not have anything against Less. I just, we tried both and we like Sass a little bit better. And Compass just kind of automates it so that it spits out all the stuff that you put in as you save the files. So it's great. I found that to be great. But feel free, whatever CSS precompiler you want to use, just use one. I really advocate that. There's also Gulp and there's these others, but we've been using Grunt for a while, and it's nice because you can just run tasks. It'll just build everything out, it'll minify your JavaScript, it'll minify your HTML, it'll push everything out to a dist directory, and then you can just push that right up to your server. So it makes your whole build a little bit more efficient. And then I'm sure a lot of you, everybody use Git, or most of you use Git, right? Or Mercurial maybe, something, any kind of version control. Well, if you're not, you really need to look at it. Git is just here to stay, is the way to manage your source control. But what I want to point out here is this idea of fork flow, or forking workflow. Bitbucket has a good blog post about this. The idea is that you should be forking all of the stuff that you have, any project, to have your own, and then you should be merging those back into a master repo rather than working. You could do GitFlow, which GitFlow just does that with branches within the same repo, but this allows you to have like a lot more separation, and it's great, and it's inexpensive. I highly recommend it. It's great for collaboration. Beyond that, I want to talk about some of the frameworks. So I'm going to get back to that fork flow thing here in a second. First thing is, we like to use Foundation. Now you can use Bootstrap or PureCSS.io or any of these frameworks that give you kind of a responsive kind of starting point. I think that Foundation for us has been good. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but once you understand the grid system and the fact that it's got its own settings file and everything else, you can really kind of quickly customize that from the start. Yes?
Frameworks for doing what?
Frameworks for doing the build. So once you start to build what you've designed there.
Oh, I just thought that was the previous slide you took on the build.
Well, those are the tools to actually do the work with. These are this is what you use those tools to work on. So once you've got Sublime Text up and you're using Git and you've got your repo and you've got the tools that you're actually going to do the actual work with, what I found is that using these frameworks and kits is a lot better than kind of rolling your own. We built a website responsively 2 years ago from scratch, and it works pretty good, but it was a huge pain. It took forever to do, and it was, at the end of the day, it came out fine, but we didn't need to spend all that time doing it. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're doing it from scratch, you're really just building your own framework. So I would advocate using one that's already pretty established. It's well tested across many browsers. If you pull this down, you can like rock and roll starting today. They even have templates that you can just pull down and start, modifying the HTML from, and it'll work. It'll be responsive right away. It'll look like a foundation site, but again, you can at least customize it from there. The next one is the HTML5 boilerplate. I'm sure a lot of you use this. It's great. They keep it up to date. And the thing about this is that both Foundation and boilerplate and a lot of these are on GitHub. So when I was talking about the fork flow before, fork the repository, pull it down. What you're doing is you're creating a copy of what they've already put up, the latest and greatest. You're pulling it down. This gives you the freedom to do this. You can now customize it, put your little stuff in, the stuff that you always do, that you like, maybe the settings that you want to have. At the same time, as they add new features and new functionality to these repositories, you can fetch and merge their changes and selectively choose what you want. So you can still keep it up to date with everything that they're building, the whole community's building, but you also have your own. And that's really powerful because it gives you the ability to take this and then make it your own and enhance it. So that's why another reason why I think fork flow is such a great design pattern. And then beyond that, there's a really great website called Responsive Patterns. Now, I've got a little video here that just kind of goes through some of the stuff. So we're going to look at there's all kinds of examples of here's a 3-column layout, with something on the bottom. Here's how it works, and you can check this out. And this is great for going out and deciding, well, how do I want to put this content together? I don't really know. Well, they've got examples of all kinds of stuff. Flexbox for, if you want to move something down in the order on the page. You see that I think 2 jumps down there at the bottom. See now 2's down here at that level. That's using a media query. It's saying, hey, I want to put this down here. You could do this stuff, and they're showing this here. And this is all curated by Brad Frost, a really, really smart guy. So I think it's a great resource. Here's the stack top links. So this just shows different ways that you can do the navigation. So this shows how, hey, once the navigation reaches low, hey, we're going to stack them up. Or, you can do the hamburger icon and have everything kind of show as, like reveal onto the page. So now we've got that, and we click, and there's our nav. So there's all these great patterns that have already been developed. So again, don't do everything from scratch. Go to places like this and see what what's there for you to work at. This is another great one. If you're going to do a map, here's an adaptive map. It'll move and change right on the page. Now, it doesn't change the location of the map, you'll notice. But the thing about that is that if somebody brings it up on a phone, it's going to load there at the right size. It's going to already be resized. And then this one, let's see, there's a carousel here. Shows how a carousel works responsively. Now it goes to 2, now it goes to 1. Again, this works. It's breaking at the point where the content's saying, hey, this is a good point for it to break. And then the last one I think I showed here is I've got the stacked pagination. So pagination is a horizontal thing. It's not going to work really good when you're on a really skinny screen. And so what they do is they use this stacking mechanism to show, oh, now that it just goes into 2 columns. So again, it's like you're not changing the content, but you're reformatting it for the interface. Yeah.
Are there any performance consequences of designing like this? What I'm thinking is if you put all this logic into your page to handle different sizes, that should increase the overall size of your payload, which means it would decrease performance.
Yes, there is. Well, I should say there can be if you don't think about that. That's why I spent time earlier in the presentation talking about the fact that you need to be thinking about page speed, and that when you're designing for mobile, you need to make sure that you're doing everything from not just minifying your and gzipping your CSS and JavaScript and combining them all into one file and limiting the number of requests and everything that Weisler tells you to do, but also going back and refactoring that code. Okay, if you can do something with the same CSS rule in many places, do it. Don't be writing 15 different colors. There's tools for helping you define it. There's some what font that Nicole Sullivan wrote that shows how many times you're using font sizes throughout your CSS. And you wouldn't believe what it looks like if you go to like Target's website. It's like, wow, you got like 50 different font sizes that you're using, but they're duplicate like, at least 20 times throughout. So yeah, refactor, because you want to keep that footprint down as small as possible. I can't stress this enough. If you're going to be building for mobile, you need to be thinking in terms of performance from the get-go. Not because it's not going to work if you've got a Wi-Fi connection on your phone, but when you don't, when you have a 3G connection, that's when it's going to show up. Again, I can't stress the importance of that enough. So always keep that in mind. Yeah, that's really important. And then finally, the Yeoman is a great tool for getting started with something that maybe. What Yeoman does is it allows you to bring things together, and it'll work with like Grunt and Bower. Bower's a package dependency tool, and it'll say, okay, well, I want to have Bootstrap, and I want to use Angular, and I want to use boilerplate, and you check the boxes, and then it like literally builds you a project with just sort of the flat files for that. It's a great way to get started with any kind of project. We found it to be really good for kind of starting our own projects from scratch, because it gets the latest of all that stuff, so you don't have to worry about, ooh, do I have version 1.3, 1.4, whatever. It does all that for you, so that's really nice. And then the last thing is testing. Now here's the thing. A lot of people forget about this, and this gets back to what I was saying, what I was just telling you about performance. These tools are here to do a lot of things for you. One of them is that, yes, if you look at like BrowserStack, this will give you, hey, here's what your site looks like on all of these different devices. It is an excellent resource. I highly recommend that you should be using it if you're building anything for the web for a large audience. It really helps you see this stuff. And this is the responsive design testing part of their site. I mean, they have all kinds of other stuff, different browser versions, everything. A really, really great tool. You should be using this because it'll help you identify stuff way before it comes back to you from your customers. The other thing is Modern IE. Now I know it's Microsoft, but this is actually a really great site. Virtual machines, you can do browser screenshots, not quite as robust, but they actually link over to BrowserStack from here. You can do site scan. Again, it's another thing where it'll alert you things, gotcha, stuff that's happened to your site that you should be paying attention to. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, the Chrome Dev Tools. Okay, so I'm sure that you're using some kind of dev tools. If you're doing front-end development, you're probably using the dev tools within Firefox or Chrome. Chrome's, I think, are just really awesome. They put a lot of time in building these. There's a series of really good posts on NetTuts that have that talk all about like the things you can do from JavaScript to layout, edit, troubleshooting. Chrome DevTools features that you might have missed: screencasting, workspaces. You can debug the canvas element. I mean, there's so much stuff. You can emulate devices with it. It's great. So I'd highly recommend that you should be using that and also checking out some of the stuff that maybe you don't know that it can do. And finally, web page test. Now, this is a free tool, and I cannot believe that it is free. If you run your sites through this, it'll tell you all kinds of stuff about what its performance is like. It'll tell you, it'll give you a report, and it'll tell you like what's happening from not just like the actual like the browser version, but also where in the world you're actually locating from. I mean, you can pick from any place in the United States to outside of the United States, because I can tell you what, if you're going to be looking at performance in places like Tel Aviv or down in Brazil, I mean, it's going to be a lot different, especially if you're hosting your stuff locally in some box that's sitting here in the United States. You should be looking at all of this, because if you're seeing really slow load times on your sites, then this is going to be a poor experience. It doesn't matter how pretty it is. And there's one other thing that I want to make a point about when it comes to the performance stuff. At some point, you're not going to be able to optimize your stuff any better than it is, and the connection's going to be as slow as it's going to be. That does not mean that you are at the end of what you can do. At this point, what I would advocate, and actually I think Luke talks about it a little bit in this book, because he built an app where in it they would load all of these records, and what they did is they just loaded the first 3. And by the time you actually pulled the drop down to grab the next stuff, it was asynchronously loading that in the background, but you didn't know that, and you wouldn't be able to, because it's not like you need to see that like right away. So think about stuff like that. I mean, think about this scenario. You've got a web page, it takes 10 seconds to load. You click on it, nothing happens, it's a blank screen, 10 seconds go by, and then it appears. Think about another scenario. You got a website, takes 10 seconds to load. You load it up, it starts to load a few things. You can see some text, and you're starting to read, and then the CSS loads, and everything reformats, and you lose your place of where you were reading. And okay, then you load a site, and it comes up. The text comes up. You can kind of read it. It looks pretty good. There's not a whole lot of decoration. You're starting to read, and then the background image fades in. Your navigation comes in, and you continue on your way. In each one of those cases, it's 10 seconds. But I would advocate that the very last one is probably the best by a long shot because it doesn't hinder you from starting the user experience right away. There was a story that somebody told me at the last, just 1 second, at the last the conference that I was at yesterday was about baggage people waiting for their bags at the airport. And I thought this is funny, is that if people were complaining that, gosh, you know, we get off the plane, we have to wait 15 minutes, there's all these complaints, and so the airline was like, all right, we're going to put more baggage handlers on this, and they doubled the amount of baggage handlers. They were able to slice the amount of time down to like 8 minutes, you know, from 15 minutes to 8 minutes, and they thought, woohoo, it's half the time, people are going to be so happy. Well, here's what happened. People still complain. They were like, yeah, this is great, but it sucks. I hate this. We're waiting around. I mean, you've been to the airport before, and you're waiting for your bag. You're like, gosh, I just want to get to the conference or go on vacation or wherever you're doing, and you're just sitting there like, this sucks. Well, what they did is they started parking the planes further away from the baggage claim, and then they would just take the bags and drive them down there on the car. And so you had to walk and get on the people mover, and then eventually it took you like 7, 8 minutes to get there. Your bag's right there. Everybody's like, this is great. It didn't change the amount of time, you know. And I'd love to be in the brainstorm when they came up with that idea, like, let's just move them farther away. So again, I mean, all of this stuff, there's lots of ways to deal with latency, and you should be top of mind when you're doing these things. So those are the things for build. I realize that a lot of this stuff focuses on, like, you know, I just went through a bunch of the how, and I don't think any of the how really would work, and I wouldn't have been able to do any of the stuff that I've done without the inspiration to do it. So I want to share with you a few of the places that I like to go. There's tons of them, way more than what I'm going to display here, but I want to encourage you that the thing is, you're going to need this stuff. You're really going to want it because I need to see like what people are doing, and I think that's important. I mean, as web developers and designers, you know, we should all be looking at each other's work and learning, hey, what's so-and-so doing over here? I mean, if you look at like the iPhone, okay, the iOS, you pull down the notifications at the top, that was something that came from Android. They're the ones that came up with that first. So people mix and borrow, you know, design stuff. If it works, great. So there's two places that I like to go. I mean, I go to a lot of places to read, but Smashing Magazine is great because they have really well-written articles, how-to, comparison stuff. If you're considering mobile development and you're thinking about, should I develop natively? Should I be using PhoneGap? Should I be using Xamarin? Should I be using something else? There's a 4-part series out there that was great, well-written, highly informative, links to everything. So it's a great resource for that. It's also a really great resource for just ideas, trends. They'll talk about stuff, and it's just a ton of content. Alistapart is great. I'd also advocate that, you know, or I'd point out that Alistapart is where Ethan Marcotte first wrote the article, Responsive Design, the landmark article that started all this back in 2011. And so, you know, if you go there, I mean, you're just going to get high quality stuff. I mean, thought leadership, the leaders of the web, they're all there. It's great resource for a lot of that. Especially if you need to make a point to somebody, if you're trying to convince your boss, be like, hey, check this out. Ethan Marcotte wrote this thing. It's really intelligent. And then beyond that, inspiration. Media Queries is a website that has responsive sites. It's curated. It's updated all the time. I go there whenever I'm trying to like think of like, gosh, I wonder how somebody's handled, you know, mobile navigation in a different way. I mean, it's an age-old problem trying to deal with navigation and just the web in general. The mobile aspect of it is even newer. So I go out there and find like, wow, this is great, you know, examples. They show them at different, you know, stages, so you can kind of see how the site's kind of like unfolding. And you get a good sense of what it looks for, but then you can click through to it, test it out yourself. So it's a great resource for inspiration. Behance is a great place in that this is a community for designers, but the designers of all kinds of stuff, whether it's mobile apps, websites. Like I said before with that timeline thing, I found some good examples on Behance of some people that had done some stuff. And it's just, the community is really super active. So again, even if you just go there to lurk, it's a great place to kind of get some ideas and inspiration. And then awards, again, this site is highly curated, and they've got stuff all of the time. It's great. It's a well-designed site. It features all kinds of really great content and examples of people that are doing things innovatively throughout the industry. So these are just some. I'm sure you guys all have your favorites, but I would say if you don't start with this, you should at least kind of use it throughout your process to kind of come up with ideas. I think it's an essential part to this whole kind of process. So just to quickly review, why responsive? I went through the statistics. You can look these things up. I mean, they're freely available to the public. You can make a case for this. I would advocate that that if you look at this stuff, people want to say that responsive is like this new thing that we are starting to do now because it's so great because the mobile explosion of users. But I would also put out there the fact that I don't know if that's the case necessarily when you think about it in terms of like the whole continuum of web development. We didn't get non-responsive websites until we could make non-responsive websites, and we did this by putting fixed width layouts, by using tables for layout in the early days, and then using CSS to say 960 fixed width, and that's why stuff isn't responsive. The first website ever was responsive. If I get a second here, I'll show you that. So again, I mean, we need to like put all those things together and make your argument. I mean, if you guys are not designing responsively, then you're doing it wrong, and you're part of the problem, really. I mean, that's not my words. That's Jeremy Keith. That's what he said last night to a much larger group than this, and everybody was like, yeah, you're right. So fight the good fight there. And then avoid the pitfalls. I mean, as soon as you convince somebody, just don't go down the routes of, the stuff the gotchas that you can get you, like whether that's doing all of the design, if it's, looking at every device and trying to cover every avenue. Just avoid that stuff. Remember that what you're trying to do is you're just trying to get somebody quickly there. So I think just content first. Like I said, these are the good practices. If you think about your content first, I guarantee you that you will be in a much better position. Even if you only do that and don't even do the mobile stuff, I don't even care about that. Just as long as you think about the content in terms of that. Even if it's just a sketch on the back of a napkin. Make sure you have your toolbox filled. You should have things in there that allow you to do everything from the tools to actually do the work to the frameworks and the kits that allow you to start that work up quickly by getting templates and frameworks to work off of so that you're not doing everything from scratch, to testing. And I can't stress the testing enough. You have to test all the time, right from the beginning, all the way through, to make sure that at the end of the day what you're delivering is going to be responsive, not just through the way that it's laid out and it's responding to the screen, but the way that it's responding to the user waiting for it to download. It should be responsive, it should be fast. Oops. And then finally, the build. I'm sorry, that's what I meant for the build. The UIX stuff I was talking about, that has to do with using the tools to do all of the structure map stuff that I was talking about, the coded sitemap, making sure that you're doing a mobile wireframe first. Even if you present the desktop version to the client first, do the mobile wireframe first so that you get that out of the way and you don't have to go back and address it later. And then finally, make sure that you're using ideas, insight, inspiration throughout the process, because I think at the end of the day, some of the best ideas come from taking ideas that are already existing and mixing them together or evolving them into something new. And I think that's really what the web is. So, thank you.